Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another podcast. Thank you again for tuning in to another great episode. Before we get started, we did want to remind you guys, if you want to be on our email campaign, which features all of our episodes of the month, plus anything that we want to let you guys know about events or future things that we want to do, please make sure you put your email on www.flippinthebarrel.com. There's a section where you can sign up to the emails. So with that said, let's get straight into our amazing episode today with Jane Stricker. She is the Senior VP of Energy Transition and Executive Director of the Houston Energy Transition Initiative. She leads a coalition of industry, academia, and community partner to ensure the long-term economic competitiveness and advancement of the Houston region towards a more sustainable and net zero emissions future. Jane holds a bachelor's from University of Maryland and an MBA from Loyola University in Chicago. She spent over 20 years at BP, working in several leadership roles prior to being in this current role. She's a national bronze medalist in cycling, which we're going to get straight into towards the end, so we can learn a little bit more about her transformation journey and see how you can get inspired as well. So Jane, thank you so much for being on here today.
Thanks so much. It's fantastic to be here.
Jane, well, we're really excited, like Massiel mentioned, and to hear some about your cycling and that passion is going to be really great as well. So let's just get started and let's really start from the beginning, because when we first met, we talked about what life was like for you growing up in East Baltimore. Wow. Your dad, he unfortunately struggled with alcoholism, and you had to see your mom, just kind of figure it out as things went along. But she actually became a really big inspiration to you. And later on, that really helped you deal with your own life struggles. Can you talk about kind of what your childhood was like and really how you adapted?
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think everybody has a view when they look back on their life and think about how hard it was or how easy it was. And for me, I always feel really grateful to have had the experiences that I had, because I do think that they prepared me really well for challenges throughout my life. And it was tough to see my mom, looking back on it, struggle to raise 4 kids on her own and work full time. And we were what you would probably consider the traditional latchkey kid. I think we were doing dishes by age 5 and letting ourselves in and helping prepare dinner by the time I was probably 8 or 9. So, but it was great. And she worked really hard. And I don't think I realized at that time how hard it was for her to juggle everything she had to juggle. And so, as an adult, and even though I don't have kids, like looking back on how much of a challenge it must have been for her to stay so positive, give us everything we need, and still do all of the other things that she had to get done. Oftentimes I'm just in awe of everything she went through. And I often tell people that I spent my 30s every time I saw my mom apologizing for like age 13 through 21, because I knew how horrible I was. So I'm just glad she didn't kill me.
Oh.
That's awesome. So let's talk a little bit about one of your first struggles in life that, you still remember till this day. And I think a lot of us going through college or just trying to figure out our lives after 18 or so, where we don't know what we want to do. It's not a path that we know. It's very few people that know, like, I want to be X one day. So you decided at that point that you were going to study in New York and at NYU in pre-med. And you quickly realize that that wasn't for you. And that happens to a lot of us. We get to the first few months of college and we're like, wow, this sucks. This is not what I want to do with my life. And instead of racking up student debt, which is really great that you thought that way and thought, you know what, this isn't for me. It's not working out. I'm just going to go back home and figure out what to do next. Because I truly believe a lot of us go through life with just, let's suck it up. And who cares if I'm unhappy? Let me just get this degree and make my parents happy. You actually thought, no, I'm going to go figure it out. So you actually moved back home, back with your mom. And like most parents, it's like, you drop out of college, you better get a job and pay for yourself if you want to stay here. And that's exactly what you did while you were figuring out your life and what you wanted to do next. You got a retail job at JCPenney, which, at the time could have felt like a setback, especially when all of your friends and colleagues are, at NYU, or everyone's going on and moving on to bigger and greater things in their career paths. You kind of just like went back to the workforce. And can you tell us a little bit about that time, how that felt, and what advice would you have to anyone kind of going through those struggles?
Yeah, it it really was hard. I think there is this expectation when you graduate from high school that you do the next thing, and the next thing is college. And so, it's easy to get caught up in this perspective that you have to take those next steps or you're not making progress. And I think for me, 1 year in, realizing that it just I was not ready for that. I wasn't mentally ready to be in school. I didn't know where I wanted to go. I knew once I got there that pre-med, that path was just not gonna work for me, and I was not going to be able to be successful. And so it was a hard decision to come home, but I think it was also hard because seeing my friends continue on in college, and I felt like I was the only one that didn't know where I wanted to go or what I wanted to do, and other people had figured it all out. And and you start to wonder, what's wrong with me? Why haven't I figured it out? What am I doing wrong? But coming home, giving myself the time and space to work and think about what is it that I really want to do. And sometimes doing something makes you realize what you don't want to do. And so, working 2 years, full time in a department store really made me recognize that if I didn't figure out what's next, this was it. This is the career. And I think that really helped me think through, how do I get to the next thing? And so, 2 years in, decided to go back to school in a much more affordable way. I mean, a year at NYU was a significant amount of debt to take on. And so I went back to school at University of Maryland, in-state school, small campus in Baltimore County, and got my degree, and really focused on, how do I prepare myself to go work and have opportunities to lead and manage people in the future. And so I did my undergraduate in political science and public administration. And when I graduated, it was JCPenney's that offered me a management role coming out of college. And so now I could all of a sudden see, okay, now I've positioned myself to grow and do the next thing. But it felt more deliberate at that point.
What I think what's really amazing is that you went into retail first because you're like, what am I going to do? Then you went back to school, you figured out kind of, okay, this is the path I want to take. And then you actually put yourself back in retail because JCPenney offers you the role. But where it really gets interesting is that you end up moving over to London Fog and become a district manager for the retail stores. And then a few years in, you end up dealing with another difficult situation, which is they were going to go under for bankruptcy. And this became a really difficult time in your career, especially because you had to go and liquidate all their assets, manage a financial crisis, and you had no experience in this. And it was all like a financial, basically a chaos at the time. But the real silver lining here is that, for one, you were still in retail, so you understood retail, but you also got a wealth of knowledge within those 9 months that you were dealing with that. It felt like 5 years of an MBA course. Can you talk to us about that moment in your career and what you remember from it, and really what impacted you to even stay on during that liquidation and not just throw in the towel when they put all that pressure on you?
Yeah, it was hard. I had literally just made the transition from running retail stores into the corporate finance team at London Fog. It had been my ambition. I really wanted to be in finance. And so I had, after 2 years of running stores, really wanted to make the transition into their corporate headquarters. And of course, 2 months after I take on that role, and I'm just trying to get my feet under me to even understand the accounting and finance side of the business, they file bankruptcy, and one by one, leadership starts quitting and leaving, and the controller left, the CFO left, all these people are leaving, and the organization is in a bit of a panic because they have to navigate through this transition. And so it's one of those situations where they're like, please stay, we will pay you a big bonus if you stay. And you have to weigh that. Part of me was thinking, gosh, if I stay for this 9 months, I'm going to be out of a job at the end of it. I know for certain that I'm going to lose my job. And so do I stay, or do I try to find something else? And so I really decided to lean in and get as much as I could possibly get out of it, knowing that at the tail end, I was going to get a bit of a bonus. It would give me a little bit of a buffer to find another job. I really thought, well, let me see how much I can learn. And I think if you go into any situation, any new job, I think, we all say fake it till you make it, but I think the reality is go in and learn everything that you can, because those are things you're going to take away and use elsewhere. And so for me, spending 9 months, as the assistant controller with 5 minutes worth of experience, managing through all of that crisis, helped me think about how do you deal with that kind of stress? How do you make sure that you're able to do all the things that need to get done? And then how do you develop this skill set that you can then transfer into other places? And so I think it's less about the job title you have and less about the actual work that you're doing, but more about what is it that you're learning from that experience that you're going to take into the next job and the next job, and continuing to grow that set of skills and capabilities that you take with you anywhere.
That's incredible advice. And, I think when you're going through these very difficult moments in your career, like you mentioned, like I could probably leave. I don't have to be on this sinking ship, for 9 months. But I'm sure looking back at your career, you will go back to those 9 months and say, wow, that was amazing. Look at how much I got done in my career because of those 9 months. So I think that's kind of such an important mindset for when you are going through a difficult role. It's just don't focus on the day to day, but focus on, okay, what am I putting under my belt? Like you mentioned, what is this going to help me to run a team later on, or to see another, closure of a business. So thank you for sharing that advice. And what was interesting is when we were interviewing you at the beginning, I was like, how did she get in oil and gas? Like, it was like the majority of like the beginning of your career was very much retail oriented. And then I thought, like, how did she get into oil and gas? So what was interesting is you saw an ad from BP, which was Amoco at the time, for a role that you were really interested in the newspaper, I believe. And you decided to apply for it. Our question was, what was your take on the oil and gas industry? Like, I believe it was in the 2000s. What did it feel like when you were like, oh, I want to go work, for BP or, an oil and gas company? What was the perception about the industry back then?
Yeah, so I mean, I was in Baltimore, and clearly dating myself by saying that I found my job at BP in a newspaper advertisement, which is how we did it back in the day. But oil and gas as a term didn't mean anything if you didn't grow up in Houston or in a big oil and gas city. Like, you wouldn't have thought about it that way. So for me, it was the only thing I knew was gas stations, convenience stores. And so for me, seeing an Amoco sign, seeing a BP sign, that said gas station. And that was really the part of the business in Baltimore at the time. BP and Amoco had just merged, and they had 5 retail business units across the country, and one was based out of Baltimore, and managed all of the retail assets and operations from like Connecticut down through like Southern Virginia. And so that was the territory that business unit covered. And so they were looking for a financial analyst with a retail background. And I saw that ad and I thought, look, it says Jane, apply for this job. And that's what I did. And so I interviewed with them, and it was doing strategy and planning and financial analysis for their retail offer. They were reinventing their retail offer at the time and combining the BP offer and the Amoco offer, and really focused on convenience store and growing that business. And I think because of the oil and gas background of the company, lots of great oil and gas and engineering people, maybe not so great on the marketing side. And that was where they were really looking to develop that skill set. And so bringing someone in who really understood marketing, retail, and customer service, I think that was really where that intersection came together for me. And so the early part of my career, I always tell people I spent the first couple of years at BP making coffee, stocking coolers, and selling cigarettes. So that was my introduction to the oil and gas industry.
That's hilarious. I think kind of also what's interesting about this is you went into retail, and when we were first talking, when we think of retail, we only think of like clothing. So to think about oil and gas having a retail side was just like a huge concept. I know Massiel and I were like, wait, what? Tell us more. And so you you went into the fact that trying to do both, like BP at the time, you were in charge of both the retail gas station division, and then also BP is, an E&P, like an operator as well. And so the company was dual focused. And we're seeing that kind of now in this space today, that companies are dual focused. They're trying to be an energy transition company, and they're trying to be an oil and gas company. And really who loses out is the customer, because they're kind of lost in what is the company trying to become? What am I buying? What is the service? There's a lot of lessons that you learned during that time. What can you share with us of like what companies have done wrong and like what they can do today to make that different? Because it's happening again when we look at, these companies struggling between being a carbon capture or being an operator. So what did you learn from that maybe our listeners can take from?
Yeah, it was really interesting. I came into everything sort of very much in a retail mindset, small margins, customer service number one. You don't have a guaranteed customer for your product. And I think traditionally the oil and gas industry has always seen themselves as someone who makes a product, and that product will sell no matter what, and they don't need to be concerned about who that customer is.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as they make the product, someone will buy the product. And I think there's a huge mindset shift. And it was evident to me working in retail at that time that it was really a challenge to get people to think differently about customers.
Mm-hmm.
An expectation that a customer is going to buy a fresh sandwich from a gas station company is just sort of, it didn't make sense at the time. And I think there's a lot of that in similarity right now when you think about, do I trust a traditional oil and gas company to be committed to wind energy, or committed to solar energy, or committed to really finding and investing in long-term climate solutions? And I think the industry is starting to realize that they need to be more mindful about who their customer is, whether it's another industry, whether it's the general public, whether it's cities or countries that are trying to meet net zero ambitions. Finding the balance of being able to provide energy for today and support our lifestyle and our world and the continued need for more and more energy, while at the same time being able to balance that with what are the solutions of the future, and how do we make sure that we're investing in the right ones,
Mm-hmm.
and the ones that will create the most opportunity in helping customers, whether they be cities, corporates, or the general public, really understand that this is a complex transition. We can't just throw out what we have and build something new. We have to leverage the assets that we have, the capabilities that we have, and much like as we change jobs and as we make career moves, we have to leverage the skills that we have and think about how we apply them differently in the future. And I think that's the key to personal growth. I think that's the key to companies being successful in the long term, is how do you take the really amazing skills that you have and that you've developed over a set of experiences and use those in a new way to do something completely different than what you've done in the past.
Mm.
Yeah, totally agree. I think that's a great way to put it. So let's talk a little bit about, you were in corporate finance at the time when Macondo happened, a horrible event that all of us know. But at that time, the main focus was to make sure the company wasn't going to, go under. It was a once in a lifetime kind of situation where no one knew how to necessarily handle these kind of big disasters. How did it feel going through such a difficult moment for your company, and then also kind of the public perception of BP all of a sudden, and you kind of being like on, quote unquote, the bad side, or kind of like how people think about the energy industry now? How did you handle that which is one of the most difficult, part of the history of BP? And then reflecting back, how did you handle that pressure and the push that it actually gave you to go towards the energy transition team at BP?
Yeah, that was an incredibly difficult time. And I think one of the things emotionally that was hardest for me was seeing a company full of committed people really trying to do the right thing, and trying to solve a problem and fix something, and make it right. and with all their heart and soul. Like, I think it's easy for people to vilify corporations because they're not a person, but they are people. They're made up of people that are really just there to try to do a good job and do the right thing. Nobody wants in a Macondo to happen. Nobody wants to see these tragedies happen, and nobody's intentionally doing something to create those. And so when going through that, watching in the media and in the public eye how much BP was being torn down and you know, I would say mischaracterized as being like this uncaring company, when every day I was going in and watching people working, 15, 20-hour days trying to solve the problem, get it right, and fix it and keep the company operating. And so for me, being in corporate finance at the time and navigating through this mass divestment that we needed to do in order to maintain enough funds to keep the company operational, you felt this pressure of, the company is counting on us to get this right and to make this happen. And so you feel very, very committed. But it was also the first time, I think, in my career where I felt like the job that I had bigger impact than just in the small space that I was operating. And so that was the first time that I really experienced all the work that we were doing in corporate finance was critical to the company, being able to continue. And so seeing your job as bigger than yourself and seeing your job as something that has an impact on a much larger population, I think is really where, for me, in my mind, I start to think about how much impact can I have in my career. And so my shift goes from, I need to get to the next job and I need to get the next promotion, to I want to work on things that have big impact. And that's really where I start to make that shift into, I spent a couple of years managing BP's compliance with the federal government after Macondo, and then into coordinating the National Petroleum Council study on carbon capture, use, and storage as part of sort of this big shift in 2018-19 into energy transition. And really seeing that we are in this unique position as energy companies, and all of us as employees working in the energy space are in this really unique position to help navigate and drive this transition that, like it or not, is going to happen. I mean, the energy industry has been in transition for 100 years as we shift from one type of energy product to another. New, if you think about the shale gas boom and all the natural gas and all of the shifts that we've made over the last 100 years to be able to provide energy to the world, being at the forefront of something this critical, where we're trying to solve that problem of how do you provide the world with enough energy and at the same time, make sure that we're not destroying the environment and our long-term viability as a race, as a people, as a universe. How do we do that in a way that allows us to meet all of these goals at the same time? And so being able to have a job where you can help solve that problem, help find those solutions, that's really where, for me, it became much less about what's the next job title and what's the next promotion, and more about where can I go and do something that's going to allow me to have a big impact.
I love that. Also what we have found that in order to have that kind of success in your life, you have to have that partner to help you. And you have been married for 27 years. Congratulations. That's amazing. And when you started really moving around with BP, your husband actually decided that it's probably best for him to retire from his full-time job and really support the roles at home and other things that he was working on, since you were really excelling in your career. And you mentioned that just now, that when you were looking for a new role, that you decided energy transition would have been the space for you to be in. But when we talked, you discussed with us how it's a lot of work. Like, this was a lot of stress on you during some times, and it ended up kind of wreaking havoc on your health, and your health started going downhill, and you started figuring out like, what can I do? I'm trying to succeed in personally and also professionally, and your husband's there to support you. And you really started to focus on yourself. And when you really started to focus on yourself, you really saw changes happening, both in your daily life, but also in your career. And you credit a lot of this to your cycling. Can you talk to us a little bit about, when that moment came to you when you realized, wow, like I really need to take a step back and look at what's going on in my life and really put myself first. And then, you ultimately ended up losing 70 pounds. So congratulations. But I think that's a really hard thing to do, especially when you're also, changing jobs. So can you, what kind of advice can you give? And, what really puts you in that mindset to really get that done?
Yeah, I think, a lot of times you hear people say, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I was sick and tired of looking in the mirror and seeing somebody who clearly was just not happy. And it wasn't about my size. It wasn't about my weight. It was about the fact that I looked in the mirror and I could see that I did not look happy, or I'd see a photograph of myself and think, gosh, I just don't look happy. And I should be. I have so much to be grateful for in my life. But I felt like I was just sort of on this constant, I have to do the next thing. I have to do the next thing in my career. And how do I make sure that I'm taking care of, as the breadwinner for the family, there is that pressure of, I always have to be looking for the next thing. I always have to be growing the next opportunity and figuring out, how to keep us happy and with a level of income that allows us to do all the things that we want to do. And so you do start to feel that pressure a little bit, even though we didn't have kids. I think just knowing that I was the primary source of income for the family creates that angst. And I think, growing up watching my mom have to raise 4 kids on her income, and my dad helped and was there. Once my dad got sober, he was a big part of our lives, but it still sort of came down to my mom to take care of us. And so I think there's always this inherent, I have to get it right. I have to figure it out. I have to figure out how to do everything and be everything to everybody. And I was not being anything to myself, and certainly not being good to myself. And so, I realized, I was smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day. I was eating bad food. I was just, everything else in my life from a personal standpoint was taking a backseat to my career and taking care of other people. And I realized that I couldn't do that anymore. I was frustrated. I felt like I wasn't getting promotions. I felt like I wasn't making good progress. And so I got up one day and said, this is it, I'm done. And started to track my calories, exercise, just sort of started some basic things to see if I could make some change. And so over time, really made big changes. And, for that first year, it was really all about eating right and getting a little bit of exercise every day. And so I'd walk on the treadmill, or I'd do Billy Blank's Tybo on video or something crazy like that. But just something that was getting me active, and it became my time for me, where I would have an hour a day of just thinking about me and take care of my health and disconnecting from everything else. And I don't think until I did that, I realized how important it is to take that time. And even if you don't do it every day, but you need to take that time to disconnect from everything else and just focus on you and whatever it is that makes you happy or helps you feel like you're improving yourself. And that was really the beginning of my journey. And so when we moved to Houston, I had gotten a new bicycle when we moved down here, and I had sort of moved beyond walking on the treadmill, and I realized in Houston it was just too hot to go out and run all the time. So I got a bike and started cycling, and that was really, as my husband would say, like that became all encompassing. Like he was like, the minute you find that one thing that you're really passionate about, that drives your whole world. Like you're doing research, you're trying to figure out what the best equipment is, what the next thing is, and that's how it became. And so that first year was sort of building a network of friends and doing rides. And then year 2 was like, let's do a century and ride 100 miles. And then year 3 was, let's see how many centuries I can do. And so it just sort of became this, with each thing, what's the next thing that I can do that I wouldn't have thought 5 years ago that I could do, or wouldn't have thought 2 years ago that I could do. And so in 2012, somebody introduced me to the velodrome here in Houston, which is really cool. There are only 5 velodromes in the United States. Velodrome racing has sort of fallen out of favor in terms of bike racing that people are interested in. It requires a very specific bike. It's a fixed gear bike, 1 gear, no freewheeling. If the bike is
Wow.
moving, you're pedaling, and no brakes. And so you are very much controlling your speed with the banking on the track and the amount of pressure and how fast you're spinning the pedals. I went to a women's clinic, and that was it. I was all in. Like, I literally the next day ordered a bike and and started going to the velodrome, which was right near the office, which was really great. So my time for me became, all about going to the velodrome and learning how to do that and getting comfortable in the racing environment. And from there it just sort of grew. And again, always about what's the next goal that you can accomplish? What's the next thing that you're going to do that you didn't think you could do? And so in 2014, I did my first national championships. And then in 2015, I raced national championships and world championships. And
Oh, that's incredible.
that was really cool.
Yeah. So you're a bronze medalist now, correct?
Yes, I'm but I always clarify for people that it's a masters world champion, bronze medalist, but old people world championships, I always say. But it was an incredible experience. And I think, my husband was so worried that I was going to be so stressed out about being in England, racing my bike. And the day of my big race, I was so prepared. My coach did such an amazing job helping me mentally get ready for racing. And so my husband takes me up to the start line to put me on the line for my race. And he's so worked up. I mean, he was like shaking. He was terrified for me, and he was so nervous. And he thought that I would be really, really nervous because I had a tendency to sort of like snap right before a competition. And as he puts me up on my bike, he gives me a kiss on the cheek and goes to walk away, and I give him a big slap on the ass. And that's when he knew like I had it in the bag, because I was so calm. And
I
so
love it. Oh, I love it.
I love it. Well, I think what's really inspiring about anybody listening is that it only takes 1% better every day.
Yeah.
You start walking on the treadmill, you start smoking 1 cigarette less a day, and then you can achieve great things, and you don't have to go in all in, because that sometimes can be harder. So it's just take it easy. And what's really important is, I think, as anybody going through their careers, you start to fill everybody else's cup and not yours. And then, like you said, you get to a point where you look in the mirror and you're like, I'm super unhappy with not only how I look, but how I feel inside. So I think this is a good reminder to all of us that you got to fill your cup first in order to be successful in all sorts of other areas in your life.
Yeah.
So the last question that we had for you was, last 20 plus years in the oil and gas business, climbing the ranks through BP and now through your new current role. What do you think is one of the things that you've noticed either in yourself in the past or in other women that really hold them back from climbing that corporate ladder to get to the top? Maybe it's something that you notice in other people or in yourself, and you were like, okay, I need to fix this in my own self, whether that was be too emotional or, take care of everybody else and not yourself, put your job before your career. Like, do you have one specific one that you're very passionate about or that has worked for you?
I think my experience early in my career and what I see quite frequently in other, particularly younger women coming up with their career is there's this sense that, and it goes back to the conversation we were having about going to college, that you have to know what that next thing is going to be, and you need to constantly be working towards that next thing. Mm-hmm. And I think what I learned throughout my career, and one of the reasons that I've had what I would call a very successful career, is I open myself up to new jobs, new opportunities, and taking paths that, quite frankly, I didn't even know exist. There was at no point in my early life did I say, oh, I want to be the corporate finance manager at BP, or I want to be the company secretary at BP, or I want to, do X, Y, or Z role. Like I wouldn't even known what those roles were, much less what I would need to do to have them. And so I think it's easy to get very focused on, I want to do this job, and then I want to do that one, and then I want to do that one, and I have to follow this career progression, and feeling like you have to follow that very narrow path. I think if you open yourself up to an opportunity that takes you in a completely different direction, you get so many more experiences. And again, it's all about what are the things that you learn in that role that you take with you to the next role. Every job has the opportunity to be miserable or be awesome. And I think if you can look, even in the hardest jobs, even in the ones that you're like, I have the worst boss, I hate him, I can't stand this, I really hate doing this job, I got to find something else. If you focus just on that aspect of, I'm miserable and I need to do something else, it's really hard to project out to other people what you're capable of because you're feeling so negative. And if you can look at every one of those experiences as an opportunity to learn something new and an opportunity to gain knowledge or skills. I worked for a terrible boss at one point in my career. And rather than let that destroy my career, I said, I'm going to learn from that, the boss I don't want to be. And so take everything as an opportunity to learn and grow, and take those paths that are sort of, branches off of the main spur. Ultimately, if the main spur is where you want to go, you can get back there. You can always get back there, but you miss out on opportunities if you don't take some of those side streets along the way and figure out new things. And it does give you such an incredible experience of building a network, knowing people, and all of a sudden you've got this much bigger group of people who are out there willing to help you out and willing to help you find the next opportunity. So for me, it's really trust that if you want to get to that point, you'll be able to get there. Take the side street every once in a while and see where it takes you. You might find that it's something even more perfectly situated for you, or more the more perfect opportunity for your own happiness.
Jane, that was such an amazing ending and such great advice to our listeners, because I feel that everybody struggles with that throughout their career at some point, especially as women, when you feel like everything has to be like a checkbox and you have to have it all mapped out, because that's just kind of how, especially as when you become moms too, that's just like, you have to have everything structured because that's just the way that you live in your daily life. And there needs to be that room for that, those opportunities for you to kind of go off that path and kind of be risky. And so I'm really glad that you shared that. And this was so amazing. Thank you so much for coming on. And we're just really happy that you shared this time with us.
Thanks so much. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed our first conversation to get to know each other. And then I really enjoyed this too. So, a huge fan of the podcast, and it's great to be a part of it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane.